Welcome to another episode of the Made to Be Great podcast. Thank you for joining me today. Today, I am going to unpack my points of view on the fiery debate that I had on my show with Logan Mohtashami and Colton, Lindsay. On that podcast episode, I was a moderator, so I didn't share my opinion of what these guys were talking about, but as a practitioner, after reading all of the comments and interactions on social media, I wanted to offer some thoughts on some of the key points from the standpoint of someone that's in the game talking to clients every day. So the biggest things from the whole episode was Logan's call about the interest rate lockdown. Him and Sarah Wheeler had famously debated, and each of them claimed to have won. But it was interesting, as a practitioner watching, we all saw our numbers go down after April of 2022 when rates doubled pretty much overnight. So I think a lot of us thought Sarah Wheeler had a very good chance at winning this debate. But what Logan did so masterfully is he actually kind of changed the script of what he was arguing. So what he was arguing is, if you think about going back to COVID times, which that will come up later for different points. But if you think of a lockdown, nothing happens, zero. And so we weren't in a lockdown per se, because there were still sales going on. Even though sales went down a lot, it wasn't zero. So I think he kind of won, if you want to call it that, by changing the argument. But there's no denying that if you look back, we're going to put this in the show so you can see this chart that I created. But sales went from averaging over 5 million a year since I looked at a 10-year period from 2015 to 2025. And if you look at the pre-super low rate environment, we had over 5 million sales a year. And so when we had, which went all the way up to over 6 million sales during the super low rate environment. But when rates doubled and then almost tripled at one point, we saw our sales dramatically decline, not actual home values, but the number of homes being sold. And so obviously the reason for that, Logan also argued that it wasn't interest rates, it was housing affordability, which includes things like property taxes, homeowners insurance, HOA dues. While it's true that all of those things in certain areas and certain communities did negatively impact home ownership or home affordability, but by far the biggest driver of affordability going down was interest rates doubling and almost tripling. I mean, there's just no getting around that. So that's kind of like a nuance that I don't think Logan really gave proper credit to. And so what I am calling that is, today on this show, I am coining the phrase the silent crash, because really it has been a silent crash for many people who don't need to make a move. And from even economists that are arguing, like Logan did, that there's not a lockdown. Meanwhile, practitioners and homeowners that were thinking about making a move, I mean, we've talked to so many people who, let's say they have right now a home that they like, 3 bedrooms, 2 bath, no pool. They really would like a 4-bedroom, 3-bath with a pool. It's not a move they have to make, but they would like to make. They have a 3.5% rate, say, on their current home. They looked at the rate at that time and what it would do to the payment, and it just made no sense. The main driver of that was not property taxes. It was not homeowners insurance. It was not HOA dues. It was the interest rate dramatically going up. And why did it go up? Back to COVID. During COVID times, to stimulate the economy, the government printed a lot of money. I won't get into the politics of that, but that is what happened. And the whole time they were doing that, they were saying, oh, it's transitory inflation, meaning it's short term, it's going to go away, which those of us who have purchased any item since 2020, we know it didn't go away. Groceries are still more expensive. Gas is still more expensive. So that effect helped homeowners, right? Because interest rates went way down, affordability went way up. Logan correctly, I think, famously argued that that was unsustainable and not healthy, even though homeowners loved it. Mortgage and real estate professionals weren't mad about it because our sales were increasing, but it was unsustainable. It's not sustainable to have that type of appreciation year after year after year, 10, 15, 20% price growth. Just personal incomes would never keep up with that, and everyone would be priced out. And so while no one loved the dramatic nature that happened of like how quickly it went down as far as sales and affordability, it probably was helpful in terms of everyone else being to afford a home going into the future. So we'll come back to that. But I think Logan's call for not a lockdown and Sarah's call for a lockdown, I think what we really had there was a silent crash. Home sales went down from they went up from the normal of a little over 5 million all the way up to over 6 million. These are nationwide numbers. And then we went all the way down to 4 million, and we've been there for years. So right now today, we have about 4 million transactions that would have happened if you look back at historical numbers that didn't happen. So there's 4 million sales worth of what I would call pent up demand, or demand that should come back into the market when affordability goes back up, when rates come back down. And so that brings me on to one of the next points, which was the other guest I had on that show, Colton, Lindsay. He and Logan got into it on Instagram, I think, because I think Logan called him out for a claim he made about him predicting a 50% price crash. And he has leaned into that and leaned into it hard. He hasn't backed off it one bit. He talks about it multiple times, usually every week. And so again, as a practitioner, I just have a hard time seeing how do we get there. And Logan challenged this on the podcast quite a bit. If you go back, you can listen to all those details. But Logan was arguing with data and numbers and charts. And Colton, one of his main points was like, hey, those charts aren't going to matter because these world events that are happening. He talked ironically about a lot of shipping lane issues. And here we are sitting today at the time of this recording where we're having a real problem in the Strait of Hormuz with oil ships and any other goods going through that waterway and being able to get access to the rest of the world, which is like 20% of the world's oil supply. So Colton can claim a victory on that one, at least right now, because there's like a world fight now over that shipping lane. But what's the real impact? So right now, we've seen a little bit of a spike in interest rates on mortgages, and sales numbers so far haven't slowed down. And the last time I checked the mortgage market before I got onto this podcast, rates were already starting to improve, and the 10-year treasury is starting to come down. So that's already kind of calming down as far as the negative impact economically. And again, last I checked before I got on this podcast, there was no solid end or definitive resolution for the U.S. bombing of Iran. And so the market is kind of doing its thing. And so, the crash that Colton called for, there's just not only no data model to show it, but human behavior, I think, is my biggest kind of like counterpoint to it, is that like, so somebody who has 500,000 in equity is just going to sell their home for way less just to unlock the remaining portion of equity. It doesn't make sense. Some people in the comments of the podcast were talking about, well, why doesn't that person who needs access to the equity get a home equity line of credit or a HELOC? And I'll go into that. But why Colton suggested that people would fire sale that is because of record amounts of consumer debt, credit card debt. And when you really look into those numbers, that's true. We've talked to people who have credit card debt that are homeowners. But if you look at the national statistical data, the vast majority of people who are credit card debt heavy are not homeowners, they're renters. And so that kind of destroys the argument that large groups of homeowners are going to fire sale their home because they can't access their home's built up equity to redistribute their debt in a way that would save them monthly payment. Certainly there are some people that would apply to, but again, I just don't think it would happen in the numbers that would be necessary to have what would be technically considered a crash at a minimum, and especially not a 50% value crash, because the majority, again, of people who are carrying that big credit card debt are renters, not homeowners. And remember, those homeowners had to prove they could afford the house at the time they bought the house. And probably their income has gone up some. And so it's just the numbers aren't there for that to happen. And consumer behavior wise, I just don't see human nature. Like, no one's going to sell their house for lower than what they have to. Back to the consolidation point, if you're a homeowner that has this big credit card debt, a home equity line of credit could help you. And there are a portion of people who we've done home equity lines for, or who we have referred to a local bank or credit union to get a home equity line to help consolidate some of that unsecured debt into a lower payment environment. And that has been great for them. I had another client recently that did a very similar move like this that was unable to. So there's a portion of people who need to get a HELOC, home equity line of credit, to help to save some money, but they just can't qualify. And so that person may choose to sell their home. And let me give you an example on some of the numbers that I'm seeing right now in the market today that kind of backs up my rationale on I just don't see how we get to the 50% price crash number. And so this particular client purchased a home early in 2022 for $550,000 in Orlando, Florida. And then right now, this move that was done was to buy a smaller home in the low 400s. And what they did, what they thought they could get for their home that they bought again for $550 in 2022, they thought they could get $725 for the home. Now, they put it on the market. They did a great job marketing it. And what they ended up getting was $700 for the home. So you could look at that and say, well, did it decline by $25,000? But that $725 was never a real number. That was a hypothetical number that they thought they could get. $700 was still a record sale for that neighborhood. And so what I see there as a practitioner is someone who bought a home in 2022 and sold it in very early 2026 for $700,000. And I think if you look back historically, I mean, there's not a lot of people who are going to be really mad about those results. That actually speaks very positively for the benefits of home ownership compared to renting. Because if you can get a mortgage payment anywhere similar to what you're paying for rent, think about the tax benefits that happened during that time if they were able to write off the mortgage interest. Property taxes, I believe, check with your tax person, are deductible no matter whether you itemize or use a standard deduction. And then you have not only the equity appreciation, which in the first 10, 15 years of a 30-year loan, your primary gain is through home value growth or equity from home appreciation. But you also get a little part of your mortgage payment every month is paying down the principal, versus if you rent and don't buy, $0 of your rent are going towards getting any equity of any kind. So these are arguments where the people that are like doomsday, by the way, there's certain economists, Harry Dent is one, there's certain news anchor on cable news personalities that are literally always calling for a crash and saying doomsday this and doomsday that. And so occasionally those people are right. But we're going to pop another chart in for you to see. If you look at this chart and you see the amount of times that actual home sale price has declined, there was a handful of years during the Great Recession, I think from 2008 to 2011, where home values actually went down. If you look at every other period on this chart, you have some periods of slowdown and then reacceleration, and it's very consistent over time. So, there's a saying that goes something like a broken clock is right twice a day. And so someone constantly calling for a doomsday scenario occasionally is going to get validation. But when you let those type of voices influence your big life decisions, like do I buy a home or do I rent a home, what you're doing is you're quote unquote, like it says in this chart, betting against the champ. And so it's just not really good statistical probability that you're going to come out better financially by avoiding or delaying home ownership to the extent that you're able to qualify now. You probably should make that move. And some other arguments for that, which people say, oh, well, when rates drop, affordability will get better. And so I'll wait until that time. If you're someone who has been pre-approved or thinks they can be approved to buy a home today, I'm going to share with you some high-level reasons why you might want to consider not doing that. This goes back to those 4 million sales that I talked about earlier that didn't happen. So imagine that right now it looks like 4 million sales, and historically this is proven to be true if you look back at the data. There's about 4 million sales that happen every year, no matter what the economic conditions are, recession or not. There's just people getting married, there's people having more kids, there's death, there's divorce, there's just a certain minimum amount of transactions that happen. So let's say that number stays at 4 million. And then these other 4 million at some point, they're going to get off the fence and they're going to jump back into the market. When do you think they're going to do that? Probably when affordability gets better, which would be mostly impacted by a better rate environment. So all these people sitting on the sideline, they're going to get back in at the same time as you. So you're going to have basically the same available amount of homes for sale, and then a lot more people jumping in to the market. And I remember personally buying a home in 2017, which is, if you look back like a normal year at the data, that was when we were like around a little over 5 million sales a year. If you're looking to buy a nice home, like close to move-in condition in a nice neighborhood that you don't have to do a lot of work to, it was very competitive. I remember we put a very strong offer and we lost out initially. And then by the grace of God, we ended up getting, as a backup contract, something happened with the first offer. They backed out and we ended up getting it, but it was very stressful. I remember I looked at it. My wife was out of town at the time. I looked at it, I FaceTimed her. We made an offer right away and we still didn't get it. So like that was like a normal market with 5 million sales. So if we have 4 million as the baseline and even half of those people jump in at the same time, we have less inventory available now. So there's just the basic supply and demand economics. It's going to make it much more difficult for you not only to get terms, which you can probably get right now, which are your closing costs to be paid by the seller in full or in part, for you to negotiate terms. You can still, in most cases, have an appraisal contingency, a financing contingency. Those things are going to become more and more difficult to get the more people that hop back into the market from these sidelined people that didn't transact during what I'm calling this silent crash. And so if you can buy a home today, rates drop, you can refinance later, but you're going to get the today price. And I'm going to tell you another hack is that these pockets where we're having economic uncertainty or political uncertainty nationwide, and you see rates tick up a little bit, if you're a buyer, this is your golden opportunity to make an offer on the house you want, because while everyone else is flinching, if you stay solid and stay in the game, you can get the house you want, the terms you want. These are opportunities handed to you on a silver platter. Don't waste those opportunities. I'm telling you, when rates start to tick down, which they eventually will, every cycle has ups and downs, that is when it's going to be more difficult for you to get into the market. So I don't want that to happen to you. If you're listening to this today, or there's someone in your life that you care about that this describes them, please share this episode with them so that they can hear this information. And of course, comment, DM, reach out. I'm here to help. But data is something that it is a very good thing to look at because it tells the story of what is likely to happen. So I appreciate you tuning in to listen to my kind of recap and my opinion as a practitioner to this episode. I may share more thoughts with this as the year goes on, because I think this debate is going to continue to rage with what I'm calling, and Logan says this too, like doomers that just constantly say everything is terrible and it's going to crash. And then, some of the things Logan says, I think I have more agreement with, but this silent crash thing is a real thing. I mean, if you look at the numbers, it's reality. Like our sales dropped a lot because the interest rate is the biggest component of affordability that was impacted. All the rest of this stuff is isolated and a much smaller part of the monthly payment and the affordability. So thanks again for tuning in today to this show. I appreciate your support, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
You were made to be great. Don't settle for less. You were made to be great. Don't